Welcome to CreativeLive's Photoshop Quick Tips. I'm your instructor, Ben Willmore. Let's take a look at Photoshop Actions. In this case, there's a technique that I like to apply to images that gives it kind of a vintage look, but I can never remember the steps. Because I can't remember the steps, I'd like to store them as an action. To do so, I'll go to the Window menu. I'll choose Actions, and I'll see whichever actions I already have created. And for most people, if you've never used actions before, you'll find just one choice called Default Actions. But I've created some before, so there's a few others. Now these are stored in little folders, and you can expand the folder by clicking the arrow next to it to see the actions contained within. Let's create our own folder to store our actions. You'll do that at the bottom of the Actions palette where you find the folder icon. I'll click on it and give this a name. Now, to create a new action within my newly created folder, I'm going to click this icon. That's going to create a brand new action. Before I click it though, just take a look over here. You're going to notice some simple buttons. This looks like the buttons that you might find on an MP3 player or a tape deck, if you know what one of those is. This is a stop button, a record button, and a play button. Watch what happens to those buttons when I create an action. I'll click here to create my action. When I do, it'll ask me for a name. I'm going to call this Antique Color. I'll click Record, and now notice down there at the bottom that the Record button is turned in and is red. That indicates that Photoshop is now paying attention to my every move. And now I'm going to do the effect that I keep forgetting the steps to. What it is I'm going to first remove the color from this image. And I'll do that by going to the bottom of my Layers panel and clicking on the half black and half white circle. That's where I create an adjustment layer. I'll create one called Black and White. That should remove all the color from the image. And I don't even need to fine-tune the settings. That's good enough. Next, I want to put color back into the image, but do it in a slightly different way. So I'll click back on the layer below, which contains the original colors, and I'm going to duplicate that layer. There are many different ways of duplicating. I'm going to drag mine down to the new layer icon. Now I have a copy. I'll put that copy on top by clicking on its name and dragging above. Then, to apply this color to the black and white version we have below, I'm going to change the menu found above, known as the Blending Mode menu. And I'm going to choose a choice called Overlay. And when I do, now you'll get a sense for what kind of color I was looking for. If I'd like to have a little less color, then I can lower the opacity found above. Get just a little more muted color, or I can turn it back up to have it at full strength. But I can just never remember the combination of a black and white adjustment layer with a copy of the original on top in overlay mode. So I've recorded it as an action. Now let's go back to our Actions panel and take a look at what we see. The record button is still pushed in, meaning if I continue to work, it will continue to record what I'm doing. If I'm done, I need to click the stop button on the left. Then the next thing you should do is test your action to make sure it works. So go to the File menu, choose Revert. That will bring you back to what your image looked like when you first opened it. And then click on the name of your newly created action, go to the bottom of your Actions panel and hit the Play button. And it should replay those steps over again and we'll get the same end result. You can inspect the steps that are made up your action by just looking below. And some of the steps will have a little triangle you can click on to expand if there's any details as to how it did each step. But you don't usually need to inspect each one of those. But now I've created my first action. Let's make one more. I'll switch to a different picture, and on this image, I would like to make it so the edges of the image are less colorful than the center. To accomplish that, we'll go to our Actions panel. I'll click the New Action icon, and I'll call this one Desaturate Edge. I'll press Record, and now it's paying attention to my every move, and I'm going to make a selection. I'll select starting in the lower right corner of my picture, dragging towards the upper left, and I'm just trying to select kind of the edge area of my image. Then I want the edge of the selection to have a soft edge on it. So I'll go to the Select menu, and there's many choices. One is called Modify, and then Feather. Feather allows me to type in a number. I'm going to type in a really high number. Oh, let's say I want 120. I'll click OK, and that should produce a soft edge. Right now we have the center of the image selected. I'd rather have the outer edge because that's the part I'd like to make less colorful. So I'll go to my Select menu and choose Inverse to get the opposite. Finally, I would like to apply an adjustment layer. So I'll go to the bottom of my Layers panel, click on the adjustment layer icon, and choose Vibrance. Vibrance presents me with two sliders. With both of the sliders, if I move them to the left, the image becomes less colorful. In this case, I'm going to move the Vibrance slider to make a subtle change to how colorful the edge of the photograph is. And let's take a look at our end result. I can now see that the edge of the photo is just slightly less colorful than the middle. And in my Actions panel, I need to hit the Stop button to make sure it doesn't continue paying attention to what I'm doing. Then let's test our action. I'll go to the File menu, choose Revert. We're back to our original picture. I'll go back to my Actions panel, click on the name of the action, and then hit play and see if we get the same end result. Now the only problem with this is you should inspect your action to see if this will be compatible with other pictures. And let's see if there's anything special I have in here that will make this work with other pictures. Do you see the choice called Set Selection? That's recording me making the rectangular selection around my image. If I click the triangle next to it to expand it, do you see how it was recorded? Do you notice the measurement system that's used is percentages? I usually have my measurement system set to percentages before I create actions because otherwise the measurement system used will be the same as your rulers. And the default setting for your rulers is not usually percentages. If my rulers were set to inches, these measurements would be in inches, where it would think about making my selection 1 inch from the left edge of the photograph, and it would finish my selection, let's say 9 inches down. And the problem with that is if you suddenly work with a much larger or smaller image, it won't be quite universally applicable. And that's why I had mine set to percentages. So if you ever make selections when you're creating actions, here's how you can change your measurement system. You'd want to do this before recording your action. First, go to the View menu, choose Rulers. Second, hold the right mouse button on top of the ruler. If you're on a Mac with one mouse button, hold down the Control key and click instead, and just make sure that this is set to %, because the default setting, I believe, is inches. And that would make it so your action would record those measurements in inches and therefore wouldn't quite be compatible with really tiny files or really huge ones. But if you use percentages, it'll always think about the edge of the document where you want it to. So here's my adjustment layer that this action has created. If I turn off its eyeball, you'll see the more colorful edge on the photo. Turn it back on, and you'll see my dulled down edge. And that gives you an idea of what's possible using actions in Photoshop. If you want to learn a ton more about Photoshop, then look at my complete course on CreativeLive, Photoshop CC, the complete guide. Thanks for watching.